Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Post-colonial nation. The task I was given is to imagine Ukraine post-colonially. Now, I am only an academic. I'm not going to be as moving as the other speakers have been. I was born in a colonial country. And for us, for people like me, for people like Frantz Fanon, the word post-colonial has been ironic and negative. In my own country, I have seen independence spoiling the day after we gained it. And today I'm going back. I've lived in the United States for 63 years, but because I wanted to be politically active in India, and I left India not because I wanted to go to the United States, I have not taken citizenship. So I have a 63-year-old green card, and I'm going to vote on the 1st of June in this. And India is supposed to be the world's largest democracy, for whatever that phrase is worth. I'm going to vote on the 1st of June in an election which has 929 million voters. So please take, and I love my American students. On the other hand, there's no denying that the United States culture today is one of fear and control. So please take my words in that spirit. I am grateful to Olya Lipinska for guiding me through the details of this trip. I am grateful to Vadim Miroshnichenko for providing scholarly material on call. And as always, to my friend and co-conspirator, Surya Parekh. As I said, I'm not a politician, but rather a paid teacher of the humanities. I hope my comments will be a supplement to the discourse that we have just enjoyed. All of the presentations have been very moving. To supplement is to deny a thing's totality. We who have given our lives to teaching through the unverifiable literature suggest with confident humility that politics are just as unverifiable as certified fiction made by human beings, so that the idea of speaking the truth is very important but incomplete. How much of this truth can we speak? The basic human affects are greed, fear, and violence. In the best case scenario, they are sublimated into external collective success and power. Motivated fiction as opposed to the apparently unmotivated fiction that is called literature. Politics as fiction with a certain degree of motivation. Politics as theater. The script most often mentioned in your case is David and Goliath. From that perspective, it is altogether valuable that your extraordinary president played that role as play before he was elected to play it for real. Our Gandhi took off his suit and put on his loincloth to play the prince and the pauper with the British, who were easy to embarrass, as he knew. Slide 1, please. And the next? Slide 2. Yes, there you are. This is the theater that Gandhi presented so that we could gain an independence that was becoming necessary because territorial imperialisms were inconvenient. And the rest is history. From this global theater, let me withdraw to the utter privacy of my personal history. History includes some sense of Jewish subalternity in Kiev. The paternal side of the Spivaks, my married name is Spivak, the paternal side of the Spivaks were from the rural area north of Kyiv. They bought the Czech name Spivak to avoid pogroms. The situation in Ukraine gives me personal pain then, because my first and loving white relatives, my first husband, Talbot Spivak's parents, as I just said, came from the area around Kyiv, where Talbot Spivak's grandfather bought the name for the family to avoid pogroms against Jews, and they remained attached to the old country. My mother-in-law cooked a mean borscht, which I have never tasted anywhere else. In the many wonderful conversations that I have so far had, you have mentioned my essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? I will therefore keep myself close to that essay. It was not a post-colonial essay. The British were mentioned as colonizers only very briefly, but as bringing in a good reform as they criminalized widow burning. The essay was, in fact, a critique of pre-colonial India. And I believe that when you will be in the happy position of imagining Ukraine after the current colonial war is over, post-colonially, the focus will have to go to that sort of robust autocritique. I say this in Africa. I've been working in Africa-led ventures at my own expense, because these are not grant proposal type projects. I say this in Africa, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Mali, in Senegal, and in Kenya all the time. Pre-colonial autocritique. Today, because of the horror of the war, you have been epistemically defined to think of yourself as bravely warlike. Yet, we must also notice that post-colonially, what we are internationally praising today is a typical ancient masculine topos, also patriarchally welcomed by women. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It is sweet and proper to die for the fatherland, a desire to fight for the country while taking care of the women and children. Post-colonially, this mood does not last. Global experience tells us that once the war is over and a post-colonial nation tries to establish itself, democracy is reduced to body count, and the state runs on what Max Weber would call a patrimonial patronage structure. This, of course, you will avoid absolutely. Over the centuries, you have been very aware of how the epistemic can be manipulated. In other words, how what we know and how we know as knowing subjects can be defined in an exclusivist way by groups fighting to hold you in power. We must not forget collective and singular politics as theater, however. There is, of course, an element of collaboration here, and therefore, what I have learned in the world of work, I've been working for the Rohingyas since 1983. I've been working for the Palestinians with Edward Said since 1974. I have a sense of, and of course, my own experience in India, I have some experience of what I say. I didn't know this when I wrote Can the Subaltern Speak? My academic life was somewhat separate. What I have learned is that unless one knows the other side intimately, my friend Ashish Nundi calls the British our intimate enemy. As you indeed know, Poland, Austria, Russia, the Ottomans, and unless you know them intimately and turn their goals around, diversified from within, your practice is neither nuanced nor faithful to everyday reality. And absolute opposition is what has been imposed on you imperially. But that's a very different epistemic charge. And you're asking me to imagine post-colonial. This is where one has to think of complicity being folded together One can't simply move from the Russian as the imperial to a phantasmatic Euro-US as a democracy. The sheer convenience of benevolent and relaxed imperiality, as it were, in NATO or the Marshall Plan. We must prove Eric Hobsbawm wrong when he wrote, and I quote, "The attempt to turn plural entities into homogeneous national states have been appalling and intolerable in its human costs." You think of the Euro-US as the haven of democracy. We, Indians and these African nations I work with, think of them as the site of colonialism and imperialism. Given what's happening with student protests at the moment, where my university was the leader, this is particularly evident. Civil disobedience is mistaken for civic disturbance. The university is real estate. Where are the intellectuals? And continentally, let us not forget the horrors of migrant politics in the Euro-US today, however kind they are to you. As for domestic justice, Teresa Girardelli tells us of, and I quote, "the betrayal of the social contract in the United States." Charles Tilly has written, and I quote him, "Various Mongol empires occupied the widest contiguous territorial range of any political organization ever to exist for some 500 years. But the double bind between the serene abstraction of the Pax Mongolica and the absolute diversity of what is called the Tatars, including perhaps our Mughals, is a representation of the incalculability and autoimmunity of the supplement. If, on the other hand, you elaborate from being folded together, from complicity, you will then have time to work on a voice so that you can become an instrument of correction for the world rather than followership. We want you to be independent, to be postcolonial, but please be aware that after independence, generally, the old structures of cultural self-representation come back. In India, for example, is today a genocidal theocracy, because our message is that in such a moment, the real task is redistribution, and an education dictated by the requirements of understanding the responsibility of voting. There is no such thing as an innocent voice. There are unheard voices. The effort is not just to make them heard, but to make them fair. My hosts at the Lviv Media Forum want me to approach the question of subalternity. This also I was told. And although it is possible to think like the other side, like Russia, and consider a monolithic, quote, Ukraine as globally subalternized, someone like me, because this is also something that was said, someone like me can contribute only in terms of the texture of the polity. And there, I know only of the Roma as subaltern in Ukraine. And yet, the voting subject of democracy, a rational abstraction, is a monolith. Here, the Ukrainian subject. This double bind, that the phenomenal subject of voting is diversified, identity haunted, always already disabled, living and dying at once from birth, and of course, raced, gendered, classed, individualized. I had hailed this in 2017 in Calcutta, in Bengali, in the first Shamorshen lecture as Ganotantrer Rahosher Dhekite Pa Diye Oshamo Dolai Dola. No one in this audience understands my first language. Because, however, I want you to feel my shared commitment to your devotion to native language address, I have uttered in it, to make you feel how much it sets people apart, just as well when the democratic subject is singular, abstract, rational. Because, however, I want you to feel my shared commitment to native language address, I have uttered in it, always remembering that critics from the core may call it I quote British historian, excessive ethnic rhetoric, unquote. Here is the vehicle for the metaphor. Now pay attention to this. You won't understand anything. And that's the point I'm making, that when one chooses one's language, as one must. Bengali is my first language. I read, write, publish, teach in it. So, but when one does it, one separates oneself. Okay. Now, slides 3 and 4. This is my vehicle for the metaphor that I quoted in Bengali about the paradox of democracy. Okay, now 4. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. This is for tourists, this picture. Go to slide 4. That's the real thing. It's a video. Please play it. Okay, they're husking rice, right? So this is my metaphor for, and you won't understand this. I mean, I can do it through PowerPoints, but it's boring. The rough translation, the double bind of democracy is to put one's foot on the rice husking machine of the paradox of democracy and swing in an asymmetrical rhythm. It was immediately available to my very large mechanical Marxist Bengali audience, but not available to you at all. That's the point I'm trying to make. It is my growing conviction that teaching literary reading robustly, the habit of displacing oneself into another's textual space, promotes the capacity to swing asymmetrically in this double bind of abstract and phenomenal forms of appearance of the democratic subject. And this is why I congratulated Volodymyr Zelenskyy's experiential access to this double bind and his adroit use of it, overturning Hegel, the first time as farce, second time as tragedy. Think about it. I work on W.E.B. Du Bois, and I asked the question, thinking of Du Bois's argument that the enslaved African brought subalternity into crisis by joining the Union Army in the American Civil War. I asked, are the Roma part of such a move in today's Ukraine, overcoming their subalternity by joining the army? Yes, said France 24 in English. All brothers at the front, Ukraine's Roma find acceptance in war. Yes, says Ashifa Kassam in The Guardian. My example can change minds, Roma fighting for place in post-war Ukraine. Thank you, Susanna Milevska, old friend. She gave me these references. She sent me a good deal of material, including the description. Since I'd been asked to talk about subalternity, I undertook this very primitive research. She sent me a good deal of material, including the description of an event, Roma in Ukraine, Fighters for Democracy, Human Rights and Justice at the Pilecki Institute in Berlin, which contained the exhibition Me Ukrainatar. Now, I've been working also for the Roma now for some time. I have not so far spoken specifically of gender. It is, of course, to be asked if the gender movements in Ukraine today, inclusive of rights for the LGBTQ+, are altogether separated from gendered subalternity, of which I knew only the Roma version. Galina Kotliuk, to whom much thanks, gave me a longer tabulation of Ukrainian subalternities, and although I have not met her yet, she has shown me that she is a kindred spirit. I have said for the last 40 years that in order to be critical of oppressed groups, we must earn the right by attempting to work within the critical positions developed within the group. And Kotliuk has given me, among the Romani, the name of Zemfira Kondor, active in advocacy of Roma communities' rights till 2022, changing a focus of our activity to humanitarian support and evacuation of people from the occupied or frontline territories. Among the Crimean Tatars, she has spoken of the activists who have been incarcerated because of their claim to Ukrainianity, of the women who go to bed wearing hijabs because they're afraid of Russian Federal Security servicemen coming to their homes at night. And she has mentioned Luftia Zudieva, who, in her work as a journalist, covers court proceedings and mass searches in homes of the activists. She informs me that in February 2024, her own house was searched and she was detained, even as she cites the many sufferings of the LGBTQ plus communities. She writes, there are a lot of inspiring stories of our LGBTQ plus defenders, and provides me links to check this out. Future work. You tell me, given the circumstances of my life, I'm 82 and bad health, I will probably be like a people's mic, passing the news on to younger people. My friend and ally Edward Said wrote that Gandhi and Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, proved that the subaltern can speak because they negotiated independence for India. He was wrong. Nehru and Gandhi were not subalterns. They were members of the progressive bourgeoisie, freeing an Orientalist, monolithic India. I offer this to you as a kind of parallel, except we were, of course, much larger. Today's India gives proof that the people in general did not share the practice of that freedom. You are unlike that because you're smaller. Bangladesh was also unlike that because they're smaller. When you're post-colonial, one of your tasks is for you to make the so-called development lobby, IMF, World Bank, International Civil Society, LMF after all is an NGO, to make the so-called, quote, development lobby consider the world's wealth of languages to be an advantage rather than an inconvenience. They keep saying that they want to work with the communities, but they have no requirement which asks even the good-hearted development workers to actually learn these unsystematized languages spoken by those who are developed. At any rate, consider the world's wealth of languages to be an advantage rather than an inconvenience. Given the very strong focus on language in many of your epistemic class mobile efforts over the centuries at the development of identity, you will be able to help us here. You're somewhat unique. I have already spoken of the doubly bound relationship of linguistic identity and the rationally abstract democratic subject. I have been working for Indian subalterns for 40 years, the so-called untouchables and tribals. You've asked me about giving, quote, voice. This was also a request. Giving voice in your initial correspondence with me. The voice of today's subaltern in the so-called world's largest democracy is the vote. In French, of course, is the same word. The voice of today's subaltern is the vote. Here are slides put together by my subaltern co-workers, some of whom have never seen a train. This is India, and they're not dumb, okay? My subaltern co-workers, without guidance from me, I just simply told them that in the Western world, in New York as well as here, they want me to speak some on democracy. You do what you think they should see. I did not do a damn thing. My supervisor, who has worked with me for 20 years, also an untouchable, and only 7 years of schooling, he has a cheap smartphone, so that's what they used. Okay. Here are slides put together by my subaltern co-workers without guidance from me, directed towards my Western companions who ask me to speak of democracy. The voice of the questioner on the first slide belongs to one of my subaltern teachers. Okay, now the rest, one by one. The rest of the slides, yes, this is the first one. It's a video, play it.
তোমার নাম কি? তুমি ভোট দাও?
See, she did it herself. They decided that what you should see is one of these subaltern voters. So she asked, do you vote? Yes. Okay, the next one.
আচ্ছা দাদা, আপনার নাম? আমার নাম হচ্ছে বাবলু মান্ডি। আচ্ছা দাদা, আপনি তো ভোট দেন? আচ্ছা, ভোট দিলে কি হয়? ভোটের মানে কি একটু বলতে পারবেন? বলতে পারছি না ভোট সবাই দেয় আমি দিই কিন্তু মানেটা কিছু জানি না বুঝতে পারি না মানে তার মানে ভোট মানে কি আমি জানি না আচ্ছা সবাই দেয় তাই দিতে যায় চলে আসি ভোট দিয়ে
I don't know this guy. I'm going there on the 23rd, right? I'm going to sit down and talk to him. But they made this. Okay, the next one. Is there another? Yes. Oh, the next one is very interesting. They sent it on their own to show the Western audience what the place is like in the rainy season. This is where the schools are. And in one of those blue huts, I have slept. Okay, so it's a video. They wanted you to see. They vote, but how different their lives are. Those are my students. Because I won't do top-down philanthropy. That blue hut I've set there. There we go. Therefore, the way to give voice is electoral education, reminding the student, elite or subaltern, and I have both, do the same thing at Columbia, elite or subaltern, at every turn, through pedagogic practice rather than lecturing, that democracy is perceiving deeply the equality of others who do not resemble you, rather than simply pursuing autonomy, your own autonomy, the situation where imperial violence has put you for the moment. Democracy is the equality of others. Democracy is a very hospitable system, unfortunately. The equality of others who do not resemble you, the latter being the position, this pursuing autonomy and rights alone, being the position in which you have been epistemically defined by a violent colonialism today, as have been the Palestinians or the Rohingyas. Andrei Zdorov, to whom also much thanks, wrote this sentence about Eugenia Bosch, the first head of government or prime minister of the first independent Soviet Ukraine. And if we are not mistaken, the first female prime minister in the history of mankind. Here is Zdorov's sentence, I quote in English, "Unlike Russian nationalists of the time and leaders of the white movement, she does not use the terms Little Russia and Novorossiya, but recognizes that Ukrainians have fully formed as a separate people, despite the attempts to suppress their national development by the Russian autocracy until 1917. Eugenia Bosch was guided not by the interests of Russia, but by the interests of the world revolution," end of quote. Bosch left a considerable body of writing, including an autobiography. Her double bind, as imagined by Zdorov, is close to mine. She was a politician in a men's world, a Ukrainian communist with a sustained and profound sense of identity, situated in a Russian proto-imperial communist state system, and she killed herself. I am a woman with no political power at all. Thank God my student, Shakil Bhatti, who is the head of Trips and Trims in Geneva at the UN, he told me, "Gayatri, your strength is that you have no power." I hold that, as a teacher, very valuable. I'm a woman with no political power at all. The supplementing literary imagination has taught me that a worldwide democratic socialism is a necessary impossibility, in view of which we work ceaselessly for the philosophers of the future. This has to be persistent work, because each generation is born with fear, greed, and violence as the basic affects. Just reading the second epigraph as I hesitantly enter Oksana Zabushko's long novel in English translation, The Museum of Abandoned Secrets, I sense that this double bind between the world and my place, this inhabiting of a necessary impossibility slanted to an undecidable future, I share with women on the Ukrainian site. And I quote Zabushko. She's quoting something. To know what's happened to us, wait for us. This is a 1952 inscription on a wall of the Lviv KGB prison, open to the public since 2009 as the Lonsky Street Prison Museum. From prison to museum, a trajectory from real to fiction that stands opposed to President Zelensky's amazing move from play to real. I wish I could have accessed Women and War in English translation, but no such luck. On the other hand, Aurelia Bors, the editor, sent me her own translation just day before yesterday, and I started reading it this morning. I read 38 pages of 128. There is no time now, but I hope I can include some comments on this brilliant collection, Letters from Ukrainian Women, this brilliant collection tomorrow on our panel. In the meantime, I wish you much good fortune in the field of battle, as well as safety in your life, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you for your patience.
Media Forum. If I'm not mistaken, it will be plus minus at 5 p.m. So if you have some questions maybe, or you have